The Johnson family loved Christmas. They loved the decorations, the food, the gifts, and the feeling of magic that filled the air during this special time of year. But one Christmas Eve, their holiday joy was turned to sorrow when their young son Billy died in a tragic accident. The Johnsons were devastated by Billy's death. They couldn't imagine Christmas without him. But they knew that Billy would want them to be happy, so they tried to put on a brave face and celebrate the holiday as best they could. On Christmas Eve, the Johnsons decorated their house and tree, cooked a big meal, and exchanged gifts. But they couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Billy's absence was palpable. After dinner, the Johnsons were sitting in the living room, opening gifts. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out. The Johnsons sat in silence, unsure of what to do. "Billy?" Sarah Johnson, Billy's mother, whispered. "Billy?" John Johnson, Billy's father, echoed. But there was no answer. The Johnsons sat in the darkness for a few minutes. Then they heard a noise. It sounded like footsteps coming from the hallway. The Johnsons exchanged a nervous glance. "Billy?" Sarah Johnson whispered again. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" John Johnson called out. But there was no answer. The Johnsons sat in silence for a moment, listening. Then they heard the footsteps again. This time they were getting closer. The Johnsons huddled together in fear. The footsteps stopped outside the living room door. The Johnsons held their breath. The doorknob slowly turned. The door creaked open. The Johnsons gasped in horror. Standing in the doorway was the ghost of Billy Johnson. Billy was dressed in the same clothes he had been wearing on the day he died. He had a sad look on his face. "Billy?" Sarah Johnson whispered in disbelief. Billy didn't answer. He just stared at his parents. "Billy," John Johnson said, "is that really you?" Billy nodded. "But how is this possible?" Sarah Johnson asked. Billy didn't answer. He just kept staring at his parents. "Billy," John Johnson said, "we miss you so much." Billy nodded again. "We love you," Sarah Johnson said. Billy smiled. Then, Billy turned and walked away. The Johnsons watched in silence as he disappeared into the darkness. The lights came back on. The Johnsons sat together in the living room, still in shock. "Was that really Billy?" Sarah Johnson asked. John Johnson nodded. "I think it was," he said. "But how is this possible?" Sarah Johnson asked again. John Johnson shook his head. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm glad we got to see him again." The Johnsons finished opening their gifts and then went to bed. But they couldn't sleep. They kept thinking about Billy.
Next story.
I love the smell of pine needles, the lights twinkling, and the ornaments sparkling. I love the feeling of tradition and family that comes with putting up the Christmas tree. One year, I decided to chop down my own Christmas tree. I had heard about a beautiful forest on the outskirts of town, and I wanted to experience the joy of cutting down my own tree. So, on Christmas Eve morning, I packed up my axe and saw and headed to the forest. I drove for about an hour before I reached the forest. It was a cold winter day and the snow was falling lightly. I parked my car and walked into the forest. The trees were tall and thick, and the snow muffled the sound of my footsteps. I walked for a while, looking for the perfect Christmas tree. I finally found one that was tall and slender, with perfect branches. I raised my axe and brought it down on the tree. The tree creaked and swayed, but it didn't fall. I raised my axe again and brought it down on the tree with more force. This time, the tree fell with a thud. I walked over to the tree and examined it. It was perfect. I picked up my saw and started to cut down the tree. It took a while, but I eventually got the tree cut down. I dragged the tree back to my car and loaded it into the trunk. I drove home and unloaded the tree from the trunk. I dragged it into the house and set it down in the living room. I stood back and admired my tree. It was perfect. I spent the rest of the day decorating the tree. I put up lights, ornaments, and tinsel. When I was finished, the tree looked beautiful. I sat down on the couch and admired my tree. I felt a sense of satisfaction and pride. I had chopped down my own Christmas tree and it was perfect. That night, I went to bed early. I was tired from the day's activities. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving in the living room. I got out of bed and went to investigate. I walked into the living room and saw that the Christmas tree was moving. I froze in terror. The Christmas tree branches were swaying back and forth. The ornaments were jingling. I took a step back. The Christmas tree started to move towards me. I turned and ran out of the living room. I ran into the bedroom and slammed the door shut. I locked the door and huddled in the corner of the room. I could hear the Christmas tree moving outside the door. I could hear it scratching at the door. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I sat in the corner of the room for a long time, listening to the Christmas tree. Finally, the noise stopped. I waited a few more minutes, then I slowly got up and walked to the door. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. I looked into the living room. The Christmas tree was gone. I closed the door and locked it. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Christmas tree. I didn't know what to think. Had I imagined it all or was it real?
Next story.
It was Christmas Eve, and the snow was falling heavily outside. A young boy named Billy was excited for Santa Claus to arrive, but he was also a little scared. He had heard stories about evil snowmen coming to life on Christmas Eve, and he didn't want to be caught outside when that happened. Billy's parents were busy decorating the Christmas tree, so he decided to go outside and play in the snow. He built a snowman in the front yard, and then he started to throw snowballs at it. Billy was having so much fun that he didn't notice the time passing. When he finally looked up, it was dark outside and the snow was still falling. Billy knew that he should go inside, but he was determined to finish his snowman first. He put a hat on the snowman's head and gave it a scarf. Then he stepped back to admire his work. Billy gasped in surprise. The snowman was moving. The snowman's eyes came to life and they stared at Billy with a malevolent glint. The snowman's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "Hello, Billy," the snowman said in a raspy voice. Billy was terrified. He turned and ran towards the house, but the snowman was faster. The snowman grabbed Billy's arm and stopped him. "You can't run away from me, Billy," the snowman said. "I'm going to kill you." Billy tried to pull his arm away, but the snowman's grip was too strong. Billy screamed for help, but his parents couldn't hear him. They were too busy decorating the Christmas tree. The snowman raised its fist and prepared to deliver the killing blow. But then, something amazing happened. A group of carolers appeared on the street. They were singing Christmas carols and carrying candles. The snowman stopped in its tracks. He couldn't stand the sight of the Christmas carols or the light of the candles. The snowman let go of Billy's arm and ran away.
As a huge support, please hit like, subscribe, and maybe share your thought or any experience before going to watch another video. Thank you so much. Have a good day.